Rachel, what is the story?
Hey,
How are you guys?
How
How
are
is it going?
I've been traded in.
I tell you, Eric, we're recording this very early for next week. We're on point. We're on top of things. It's not me or you, my man. It is Rachel taking over once again for another week. Rachel, what do we have in store this week? Straight into it.
I suppose I'm going to start off with a fun fact for you guys. Did you realize that of all sort of sports science studies, that only 36% of participants are female? And out of all the sports science studies that are done, only 6% of those studies are on all female groups. So we can see why knowledge about female health and different things in sport is so lacking, because the studies just aren't there to back it up. So obviously that's why we're doing this mini series. We are trying to sort of raise awareness for women in sport, give it a platform, promote it. And today's guest absolutely does that.
Rachel, when you were in sport, did you notice the lack of women when you were in the athletics clubs? Did you feel there was a little bit of a difference, or is it something that's noticeable, or is it when you're younger years, everyone's kind of somewhat involved, and then as you get older, it lessens out? Or how did it make you feel? I know we're cracking into a long one, but I just wanted to get your little insight.
Yeah, in school, the participation in school was very, very poor, especially in PE classes. I was very lucky that the athletics club I was part of had very, very good girls around my age. We had a brilliant training group of females. But then as I got to maybe junior level, so end of secondary school into junior, then under 23, most of those girls stopped. And I don't think any of them and we had, we could have had 10 of us at one stage, probably more. And none of them are really doing much anymore. So there is that massive drop off, particularly in the later teenage years. And it did become way more noticeable around that time. But
very good. It is good to see like the stats, even with you from reading the stats, putting it into that perspective is brilliant. And well, I suppose it's time for me and Sean to learn a little bit more than this week.
Yeah, and this week, we have a brilliant, brilliant guest on, Martina from Fit Mná. She's going to come on and introduce herself in a few minutes. But I really recommend everyone, whether you're male or female, give this one a listen. It is a bit longer, but the information in it is just incredible. We go through everything from just training around the menstrual cycle to training pre and post pregnancy, the whole way up to the menopause, and training in your later years. I highly recommend it, especially for females out there, young females in particular, who aren't maybe that educated in this stuff. It's well worth a listen, and I really, really hope that you get something from it.
Yeah, and it is a listen, and for that as well, if anyone is listening, like us, it's a little bit awkward for me and Sean, and it shouldn't be awkward to talk about menstrual cycle,
no.
Especially when we're training people and dealing with women. And it's something that we should make normal, I suppose.
It's part of the
progress. So if anyone out there has, and if anyone has questions, you can ask me and Sean, but we're probably going to divert to Rachel for some extra advice. But after this one, hopefully myself and Sean, I'm hoping we get a little bit more enlightened after this one. It's a good one.
Yeah, but when you think about it, and we do mention this like in the podcast, like 50% of the population roughly is female. So this is stuff that females are going through every single day. Like your menstrual cycle never turns off. So why should the conversation about it stop? Like when this is something that never, ever switches off, why does the conversation stop? And that is something that I would love someone to enlighten me. Why don't we talk about it? Why does it stop? So I'm going to do enough talking about it. I think you guys have done enough talking about it for one night. So let's just crack on.
Hit the intro music, Sean.
Let's go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our mini series on women in sport. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I am delighted to once again bring a fantastic guest onto the podcast. So Martina Dunne from Fit Mná is joining me this week. So Martina, it is great to have you on. If you'd like, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm a personal trainer. I have my own business or company called Fit Mná, and I just specialise in women's only fitness, but particularly pre and postnatal training. So just trying to help women get fit and stay active during and after their pregnancies.
Is it something you were always into, or did it come about? Tell us how you chose to do this, or why you chose this particular area.
So I suppose it started, like I played rugby, when I finished secondary school in the local club. And it was one of the things that really struck me was when women got pregnant, they never came back. Now, obviously, I understand women can't play contact sports when they're pregnant, but even after they'd had babies, the guys would be back out playing on the seconds or the first or whatever it was, but the women never came back. And I only presumed at the time that there was, time demands and all that sort of stuff on for women. And then when I trained as a PT and I was working in a commercial gym in Dublin, I was the only female on staff. So I got a lot of the women who would come in looking for personal training would request to be trained by a woman. So I ended up with lots of sort of accidental women clients. And I found that I just didn't have the skills to coach them. There was women with prolapses, there was women with, who had gotten pregnant while I was coaching them. And I just decided to really serve that sort of unique population and to go and train and learn all that I could about this incredibly challenging time in women's lives where, they're pregnant and immediately postpartum.
That is fantastic. So you just saw that kind of gap in the market, let's say, or I think you probably agree that this is something that you don't hear a lot about. Like when we talk about fitness or personal training, you talk about all the reasons why, but you never really hear of them catering towards women who are pregnant or who are hoping to become pregnant or just coming back from pregnancy. So it is fantastic. What do you think the attitude is in general towards women's health in sport? Like, do you think that obviously there's women out there who are eager to get back and to keep active throughout all stages of life? Do you think that maybe they're a bit discouraged by, as you said, maybe the lack of female personal trainers out there or the lack of knowledge? What's your opinion?
So I think it's definitely changing. We have a lot more women who are training now than ever before. We just need to look at our mother's generation. Like my mother never stepped foot in a gym. Nearly all of my sisters have been to some sort of, fitness class or gym class or boot camp at some stage in their lives. So it's definitely changing trends. And I think now women are more empowered to seek the right knowledge and to get back training after they've had their babies. Whereas before it was kind of like, you're a mother now, you go for your walk, or that would be the extent of your exertion. So it was very rare and elite sportswomen who went back to training after they had babies. I think a lot of the problem is that there's this huge lack of knowledge around one, training women, and two, training women, pregnant women and postpartum. So like you have GPs advising women to not take up exercise when they're pregnant. Like the American College of Gynecologists recommend that if you have a low risk pregnancy, it's perfectly fine to start training. And to maintain a certain degree of physical activity. So if you've been running or you've been training to a high level, tapering the intensity towards your trimester of pregnancy, but continuing to train and, getting back into it, provided you follow the correct protocols after pregnancy, is definitely ideal. We think about the health across the lifespan from menstrual cycle to pregnancy, postpartum, and into menopause and older years. Really, some form of physical activity is required or recommended in all of those stages. So why are we leaving these big gaps when women are pregnant or postpartum? Why they're not training? It just doesn't make sense. For a healthier population, we need to be moving more.
And you even see, I think it really came to the forefront in the Olympics just just gone, a lot of the women returning are mothers. And I know, like, particularly some really big names like Alison Felix. She talks a lot about being a mother, you know, having her sponsorship with Nike drop, things like that. And, you know, you said that kind of we're really shifting or changing the focus. And I really think the women at the top level are leading the way in that. And even the sprinters, the Jamaican sprinters who, you know, you see at the end of the race, all their children run out to them. So I do think that there's a real sense of, I'm a woman, I've had it, I am a mother. That doesn't mean I can't be an athlete.
Yeah, and like it's shocking to say that there still is some barriers there for the likes of Alison Felix. You know, they had to petition to have you know, some of them were breastfeeding, and they had to petition to have the babies accompany them because they're not spectators. They're, you know, a child is dependent on its mother. And if they weren't bringing, if the kids weren't traveling, the babies weren't traveling, they were sending milk back to the US from Tokyo, which is just insane. Like, why is there this huge barrier for women to get back into exercise? And it's definitely something that needs to be examined. But I think it comes from having more education around, you know, women training during pregnancy and just being more vocal when it comes to the postpartum and knowing where to get the right help, the right advice, and then getting back into training.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'll even go back a step further, just that gap in the knowledge. Like, from my own experience, I think that gap in the knowledge is just around the female menstrual cycle, full stop. Like, I think that from, like, it's something every woman experiences it, like, so why is it not talked about when every single woman goes through it, and every woman in sport has trained at some point in her cycle? But yet, if you were to ask people, well, do you actually know how your cycle impacts your training? Or, you know, have you ever spoke with your coach about why you're maybe feeling more fatigued on this particular week every month? I believe that the gap in knowledge starts just with the cycle before you even bring in pregnancy or later on menopause into the equation. And what's your view on that?
I completely agree. And like the Well HQ are an English company, and I find the English research kind of crosses over into the Irish sort of population very well because we're they're our closest neighbours. It just makes sense. But they did a study, and they found that 1 in 4 like teens and sort of, you know, those sort of women, like girls coming up to menstrual age, were unprepared for their period, and 1 in 7 didn't know what was happening. Like, if we are in the 21st century and we're having 1 in 7 of young girls don't know what's happening when they get their period, how can we ever close the gap so that people understand when they're training at under 23 level or, you know, elite level, what, you know, how to work with their menstrual cycle, rather than just taking it as a granted that they're just going to not perform, you know, on certain days, or even not realizing that they're going to be at a disadvantage or that it's going to be harder for them to perform. I think there has been a rise in femtech, which is like, you know, the whole feminine technology, whatever. And they're saying it's a niche market, but like, it's half the population. You know what I mean? Half the population of Ireland should have something that kind of, even if you're not tracking it on a calendar, but you have an app that helps you to understand what's going on in your body at particular times. Like, you have the likes of the Wonder app, which tells you what's going on in your baby at certain points, like, you know, the 4-month sleep progression, all that. But we don't understand our own menstrual cycle. So it's just bizarre. Like, I really do think we need to start off with educating, you know, young girls and teens about this. And maybe that's where, you know, secondary schools and PE classes have a crossover of, you know, just helping girls to understand their own menstrual cycles.
Yeah, I completely agree. As you know, a science teacher myself, the menstrual cycle is something we do teach, but I think that crossover, that link into PE, is something that could definitely be developed, and then you're teaching them at a young age while they're going through the early phases of their menstrual cycle. But I also love on your Instagram stories, I think it is, the thing you start off with saying about, you know, your period doesn't have to hold you back. Just because you might be bleeding or in the week leading up to your period, it doesn't mean you can't perform. And I think you probably know, seeing as it's your Instagram, but is it world records and world championships have been won at every stage of the menstrual cycle. So if you understand your body, it's not going to hold you back. Like, it shouldn't be seen as a disadvantage just because you're a woman, just because you're going through this. It shouldn't be a disadvantage. And if we're educated and can work around the menstrual cycle a bit more, that can lead to big things.
Yeah, completely. And because in the ideal world, like when we think about the menstrual cycle, and it's broken up into a couple of distinct phases, which I'll kind of talk around, but like the first sort of 2 weeks, of your menstrual cycle, from say day one of your period to sort of ovulation, would be classed as like your best opportunity. That's where you feel the best, the strongest. That's the follicular phase, and your body is basically just getting ready to release that egg. Like in the ideal world, if we were training or competing, all of our training would be done within those first 2 weeks. But it's not an ideal world. You can't say to the Olympic Committee, like, hey, hold on, I meant to run this race, on this date, but I'll actually be in the late luteal phase of my cycle, and I can't, I won't be at my best. Can we change the date? That wouldn't work. So I think it's being aware of your individual menstrual cycle and how that affects your training. And the only way you have that awareness is by tracking it, but it's tracking it consistently, and not just over one cycle, but over many cycles. So if we're thinking about and I think Olympic athletes are kind of, they're the easiest ones to kind of think, because they're the higher echelons of the sport, and they're the ones that we really look up to. But if you think about it, they've got a 4-year cycle for the Olympics. So if they're tracking their menstrual cycle every month for 4 years, they have this huge bank of data. They know what suits their body. They know what recovery protocols work really well for different stages of their cycle. Their higher protein requirements, and when they can push and when they can ease back. And that means that when they're pushing, they're getting the best benefit from the training. But when they ease back, they're also getting the best benefit from the training. They're not feeling overtrained or deflated. And it all just makes a little bit more sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. And you are definitely right. We do tend to talk about those higher end athletes because, they're the ones that we can follow along with. But, at the end of the day, your menstrual cycle is your menstrual cycle. So if it works for them, it'll work on, the same scale for you, training around. And just one thing, and I know this is a definite misconception because it's something that I had as a young athlete, growing up, is that you were mentioning the follicular phase there. Your first 2 weeks are when you're most prepped to train. That's when you're probably feeling your best. And I think most people think that as soon as they start bleeding, that should be when they're tired. That's when they nearly don't want to do sport, because you have this added thought of, oh God, like I'm on my period, like I need to factor in all of this. It can be a stressful time for some girls trying to plan in, am I going to be out on maybe a long cycle or a long run? Will there be toilet facilities? I think that plays on people's minds as well.
It definitely does. And I think because we have this huge stigma about talking about our period. Like, we don't want to talk to, if we're training with a group of people, and maybe some of them are females and some of them are males, and even coaches, we don't want to talk about, well, I'm on my period, so I might need, a toilet break, or, I need to carry tampons with me, or, that sort of stuff. And almost ideal, if you're on a training cycle, you can probably look at the sort of route you're planning on taking and just make a point of saying, when we stop for coffee at this point, just make sure there's a toilet so I can nip in and change a tampon or pad or whatever it is. But a lot of the time, if you're out running, or say if you're running in the country or trail runs or something like that, they mightn't have those facilities. So it's being aware that you can work around that with certain products like menstrual cups, because they're good for 12 hours and stuff like that. But, and again, it takes a little bit of practice with those. But it goes back to that awareness of your own menstrual cycle and being able to make those plans, for the individual rather than, you know, everyone together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And again, it's just about getting that conversation going, especially if you're training with other females. Like, other females are going to have been in the same position as you. They might even be on it at the same time. And if they see you being like, well, look, actually, I'm at this stage, I will need to stop, maybe they'll build up the confidence. I think it just takes one person to speak up and say, look, can we do this around me for today? Because I'd appreciate it. And then someone else might be like, well, actually, you know, that I shouldn't be afraid to say, look, can we stop for a second?
And like, I would say, like, it's definitely, you know, when we talk about the menstrual cycle phases, so you have your follicular phase, and then you move into ovulation, and then you got mid luteal and late luteal, and the luteal phase is where sort of everything changes. In the follicular phase, we behave very much like men, so we have those strength and training adaptations. You know, it's much easier for us to recover. We're more able to train in hot and humid weather. But when we get to that late luteal phase and we get that high hormone, so estrogen and progesterone, it's harder for us. Our internal body, because of the progesterone, we're running 1 or 2 degrees warmer. So if we're training in hot and humid weather, we need to take on more water. We need to do a different like cooling down protocol. And we need to make sure that we're probably not going to be able to hit the same intensities. So it's more so in the late luteal, the mid and late luteal phases, where we need to say to people, okay, if we're training as a group, I need to take more water breaks. I can't hit that intensity, so I need to run a fraction, you know, slower. I need to cycle a fraction slower. And maybe it's a case of the women will, you know, come together and say, well, you know, the guys can do their thing and we're going to stick together as a group and do our own thing when it comes to training like that. And even having that confidence to say to the coach, like, this is the session for today. So say it's like, you know, 6 by 1 miles or something like that. Saying to him that, okay, like, it's on, because of the phase I am in my cycle, I'm unlikely to hit these. I'll try and the effort will be there. But if they're slower overall, that's okay. Maybe adding in a little bit more rest, or even just skipping the session altogether and going for a lower intensity run, so that you're keeping those adaptations for when you are feeling fresh in the follicular phase.
I think that could tie in quite well to heart rate training, because just because you're not hitting the times you're expected to hit, if you're looking at your heart rate and your heart rate's still elevated, you can still see that you are putting the effort in. You might just not be able, as you said, for the intensity that particular day. So it can be good to adapt your training, like even just something simple like the heart rate monitor, so you know not to push it more than what you'd usually push it at a certain time.
But in the late luteal phase, because the effect progesterone has in the body, it actually makes your blood thicker. So your heart rate is working, your heart is working harder. So that's why prehydration and hydration is really important in that second stage of your cycle. So with your blood being that slight bit thicker, your heart rate is elevated anyway. So that's where you kind of get into this problem where you think you're working at the same intensity, but it's actually a little bit higher because of the heart rate adaptation in the late luteal phase. So you could use stuff like if you're out on an easy run, the talk test, like, can you have a conversation with the person beside you? Or even just, RPE or the Borg scale, whatever it is. So that's like 6 to 20 or 1 to 10, whatever you feel comfortable with. But again, it goes back to what we were saying, is building that database over numerous cycles. So you can say, okay, in my late luteal phase, on my speed session days, I'm not feeling so good. So maybe I need to, instead of doing 6, I do 4. And, I'm making those adaptations with your coach so that you're, feeling fresh when it comes back around then to your follicular cycle, you're fully recovered and you can, or follicular phase, and you can hit those sessions, back at the 6 by 1 miles or whatever it is.
Yeah, back once your body is more able to take on that load. Tech companies are really making it a lot easier for women to track. Like, I know the iPhone for Definite comes with an app, part of their health app. You can track your cycle. You can put in all symptoms, like if you're feeling fatigued, bloated, things like that. That's all now just part of the iPhone. I'm sure other phone companies are doing the same, but it is getting a lot easier to track it. So really for young girls out there, even if you don't want to have this conversation yet, if you're not confident enough to have it, you can still be proactive and still track on your phone or download an app. Like there is a lot of free ones out there as well.
And like even your Garmin has a function where it tracks your menstrual cycle. It doesn't take into account symptoms or anything, but it gives you a rough indication of you're in, the follicular phase, ovulation or luteal, and it predicts when your period is going to start. So on a basic level, once you sync your watch to your phone and you open up the Garmin Connect app, it's right in front of you. And there's a couple of apps as well, like Fitter it's a free app, and it's brilliant. Like they've worked with the Chelsea football team and all these sort of women's football team, so they really have that sort of database of even elite athletes, and it's nice because it gives you some training recommendations and some nutrition recommendations, because your nutrition requirements change over the course of your menstrual cycle as well. And then Wild AI is an app that's gone one step further than that, and that's developed in partnership with Dr. Stacey Sims. So she's kind of like the leading researcher on female physiology, and it goes into really in-depth sort of recovery protocols. So like even changing up how much protein you need to get after training sessions, and all of that data basically feeds into like a readiness score. So your sleep, your phase of your menstrual cycle, what your hydration's like, what your nutrition's like, and that kind of chucks out a number that gives you an idea of how ready you are to train. And I think the key thing with these is like there's a couple of, we're now realizing that the menstrual cycle is a fifth vital sign. So if you're missing your menstrual cycle, there's something gone wrong somewhere along the lines. Like REDS is a very real problem in a lot of the non-elite population who are just exercising. That's relative energy deficiency in sport. That can lead to loads of problems like osteoporosis and osteoarthritis down the line, hormone dysregulation. And when we talk about pregnancy, obviously having good hormones in a menstrual cycle, making sure we're ovulating, is key to getting pregnant. So even if you're just tracking on something like the very basic, which is, would be your phone or your Garmin, you notice when you start to miss menstrual cycles, and then that's when you start asking questions. Okay, what am I doing? Am I training too hard? Am I not fueling enough for these efforts? And what can I change that's going to help to bring about my menstrual cycle? And coordinating with your GP then as well, or dietitians, whatever you need to get yourself back to that healthy baseline.
And say for any women out there who are on a contraception, whether that's an oral contraception or something like the coil, how does that affect your menstrual cycle? Are you still going through the same phases? So is your body still sort of reacting in the same way? Like, are you more able to adapt in those first 2 weeks to like strength and intensity? Or does contraception affect that?
So it depends on what contraceptive you're using. So with something like the hormonal intrauterine device, which would be your coil or whatever, that's a steady release of a hormone. So that's going to affect how your cycle looks, hormone wise, over the course of a month or whatever. Stuff like the copper IUD doesn't actually have any hormones. It's a sperm don't like copper, so basically that's the way it works as a contraceptive. And then the oral contraceptive is the same thing. With the oral contraceptive, people think they still get a period, but they don't. So what it is you take the 28 days, whatever it is, for your pill, but in fact you're only ingesting hormones for like 21 to 24 days of that, and the other 7 to 4 are 4 to 7 is a placebo. So you get this sort of withdrawal bleed, but you're still not ovulating, because essentially what those hormones do is it's progesterone and estrogen or mix, they just suppress the ovulation. So you're not getting the steady rise of estrogen, the start of your cycle, and the peak of progesterone at the end. So you could nearly say that it levels out the hormones, so it levels out the playing field for you. So you don't get the late luteal phase or the mid luteal phase that you would get if you were normally cycling. So you should be able to have a more steady or regular training pattern, and just be aware that on the sort of bleed days on your pill, that your hormones are still a sort of a baseline. So it really does depend. But I would say the key thing is to also go back, because these are all, when we think about, everybody is individual and everybody's menstrual cycle is individual. But these are drugs and devices which have a sort of a broad spectrum. They're done for the majority of the population. So although it's everybody, like, there might be a couple of you on the same pill, you might get different symptoms and different effects throughout your menstrual cycle. So it's still recording that and seeing how that data helps you to change your change your training, change your nutrition for that stage of, whatever you're taking, whether it be the pill or you have the coil in.
Okay, amazing. So a lot of great information there. Because then, you have, I have heard stories over the years of, again, top class athletes who maybe went on the pill purely to regulate their period, or who have been on the pill to try and delay their period leading up to competitions and stuff. And like, when you think about it, it's probably not something we should be messing with. Like, if this is natural, it's supposed to happen every sort of 21 to 32 days, depending on the individual. You should not really alter it. So when you hear stories of people doing it at a high level, and particularly with like maybe male coaches or things like that, like, that's something that probably sends alarm bells ringing in your head.
I completely agree, because like, yes, you're right. You're not regulating your menstrual cycle. You're just suppressing ovulation, which means you're missing out on that first 2 weeks where you feel really, really good. And, you get this sort of, at the tail end of your menstrual cycle, you actually get the sort of estrogen and the FSH peaking again. So you can actually have a sort of a, more than a 2 week window. And it depends on when you ovulate as well. Not everybody ovulates that standard 14 days. So, and even with your awareness and tracking your menstrual cycle and putting in place different things like, changing up, your carbohydrates, fueling and stuff like that, you can actually get great results throughout your menstrual cycle without taking a hormone contraceptive. I think the key thing to remember as well is that if you were just getting a withdrawal period bleed on the pill, you're masking that potential that you've got amenorrhea, or you have a dysregulation in your menstrual cycle. And we've said that that's the fifth vital sign. So if you're masking that, how healthy are you? How do you know how healthy you are if you're not really seeing that other sign?
Yeah, so I think for anyone out there who's, maybe starting it probably is good to completely understand your cycle before you start on anything like that. Or definitely, again, it just comes down to being educated. Go talk to your GP or talk to a gynecologist or someone who can advise you. But definitely, if you understand your body, like, nobody's going to know it better than you know it. So if you understand it before you're on any of these contraceptives, it can probably help you, as you said, just in case you're masking any kind of abnormalities with it. So then obviously we know that people take contraceptives to avoid getting pregnant, but let's shift back to pregnancy and training. So I probably just let you take over, seeing as you're the expert. But if someone was trying to get pregnant, how does high intensity training affect that, or does it have any effect? Because people, a lot of people do things if you're trying to get pregnant. People tend to mind their bodies. There's all stuff out there telling you what you should do to try and maximize your chances of getting pregnant. But how does training or even high intensity training fall into that?
So I think like there's a couple of key concepts, and one is like body fat is one. So women are built differently to men. We naturally carry more body fat, and that's just an evolutional thing that kind of says to the reproductive system that, okay, if we got pregnant, we can sustain this pregnancy because we have, energy stores. So one is making sure that we're not like super, super lean. And then if we are sort of, on that leaner scale, and we're looking at sort of elite, athletes or people who train a lot, is making sure that we're fueling adequately. So if you're fueling adequately with whole carbohydrates and lots of healthy fats, you actually shouldn't have too much of a problem, because that energy availability is supporting the reproductive system and supporting the body getting pregnant. And then, obviously having that regular menstrual cycle helps a lot. When we think about high intensity training, there's probably only, I know when you're going through IVF, they recommend that you back off the high intensity. And that's just because there's so much going on in the body. There's so many extra hormones present, that it is just counterintuitive to be going really hard at that stage. But I think and I've had, lots of women come to me who have been training, quite consistently, quite regularly, and, doing quite intense sessions and still got pregnant. It's about that energy availability and a regular menstrual cycle, and making sure you're getting in lots of whole foods with good nutrient qualities. So avoiding those sort of processed meats or processed foods, and lots of anti-inflammatory stuff that makes you feel good anyway, will help to support the reproductive system and the chances of getting pregnant. And then, the main thing is taking folic acid. They recommend you should take folic acid 6 months before you get pregnant. Like, I don't know very many people who plan 6 months ahead for anything. So it's kind of key, if you're in that sort of childbearing age and it's something coming up in the future, to have your mind on taking a bit of folic acid as well.
And that's actually something that can that lead to fatigue? Like, obviously with women, with bleeding and stuff, we do tend to have lower iron levels as well. So fatigue can crop up. And folic acid, is that something that you take anyway, or is it just purely for if you were trying to get pregnant?
So folic acid is it's a B vitamin. So like most multivitamins will have folic acid in it, because like that, they're trying to cover off the population, just safeguard. So if you're taking some sort of a multivitamin, you're probably getting enough in. When it comes to iron, you're completely right, because we bleed. If you're running, if you've got if you're not a vegetarian or a vegan diet, or even if you just don't eat a lot of meat, your iron requirements are higher. So it's important that, and obviously that affects fatigue and performance, because the iron helps to build the red blood cells, which carry the oxygen to the working muscles. But if you think about like making sure that you've got enough of that in, taking a supplement can cover that off as well, or just trying to get those heme iron sources in, so that's your red meat, that sort of stuff. I think the key thing with the iron is after intense exercise, your body actually goes through a stage of inflammation, and iron really doesn't like inflammation. So effectively, your body can't absorb. So if you're taking your iron supplement, or you're going for a hard run, you're sitting down to a steak and thinking you're covering off your requirements, your body actually won't be able to absorb that because of the inflammation. So taking it at opposite ends of your training. So if you train in the morning, take it in the evening. If you train in the evening, take it in the morning. And then adding a bit of vitamin C in as well. So when we think about whole food sources, heme sources, your red meat, having some vitamin C, so peppers, even bran flakes and strawberries are a really good combo. And then if you're non-heme, you just need to eat more. So I think the recommendation is like double the iron for vegetarian diet. So it's like 18 milligrams a day, which is quite high. and you're looking for your dark leafy greens with that, tofu, and some nuts as well. But adding the vitamin C into that so that you're getting that full absorption of that mineral into your body.
Fantastic. So it really is kind of balanced diet. So diet just is important, whether you're trying to get pregnant, you are pregnant, or even just in the general menstrual cycle. It seems to be very important. But then there's also a lot of talk about, when women should stop training when they're pregnant. And I know this was something that Sonia Sullivan did discuss in her book, when she stopped training with her pregnancy. But then you hear, you've probably seen footage of the American 800-meter runner, Alicia Montano, who actually competed in the US trials while 8 months pregnant. So she was 6-time champion, 800 meters champion. And then in 2014, she actually completed the race while 8 months pregnant. So she's clearly an elite athlete to be winning the 800-meter trials at USA, like the USA trials. But then to come out and be like, well, look, I'm still an athlete. I might be pregnant, but I'm still an athlete. I can still show up and I can still compete. I think that is incredible.
It is. And I'm a big fan of hers. And I really like her approach to things. Like, she is, yes, she's a mother, but she's also an athlete, and one is not mutually exclusive. But for me, as a prenatal coach, I always ask my clients, what's the risk v reward? So anecdotally, I've had people tell me they run up to 36, 37 weeks pregnant, and all I'm thinking of is their pelvic floor, their pelvis, you've so much extra stress on that system. And it's not just the pelvic floor, but the whole body system. You've increased your weight. So now you're pounding joints and ligaments that you're hopefully going to return to running postpartum. Your pelvic floor, your core, the pelvis, even your upper back, your rib cage, all of those things have to be accounted for. So I would usually suggest to clients that you can maintain your running up until about 12 weeks. And then I kind of say, let's scale it back. We can still work up a sweat here without, going for a run. So something like biking is a great idea. Or even CrossFit style low impact workouts will still work up a sweat, but you're still asking yourself, what's the risk for your reward here? And I think, again, it comes down to this sort of lack of education. A lot of people will say pregnant women shouldn't train. And then a lot of people will say, just do what you've always done and you'll be okay. Listen to your body. And sometimes it's really hard to separate the athlete brain from the pregnant or the mom brain. So you're kind of okay, the athlete brain wants to run this 800-meter trial, but what does the pregnant brain think is a good idea? And sometimes we just have to leave our ego at the door and say, I would rather be running the 800-meter trial 2 years after giving birth and winning rather than proving a point at 8 months. And it is hard. I completely empathize with pregnant clients. It feels like a loss of identity, but it's only for a short period of time. And that's the key thing.
As you said, it's better to not do it for that few weeks while you are pregnant and then be able to come back afterwards. But I suppose you just think, I think runners especially think if they're not running, they're not training. And I think it's important to be well, no, you can get involved in yoga, you can still do strength training, just don't do the load bearing. Because you imagine filling up a massive rucksack and strapping it around the front of your body and trying to run. You are essentially carrying an extra weight around with you. And like you said, that is putting the joints under pressure. So really, just because we're not running doesn't mean we're not training. So just find alternative things that, are going to make you feel good, but aren't going to put your body under unnecessary stress. Because I'm sure when your body, when you are pregnant, your body is under a lot of stress anyway.
Yeah. And there's a load of the physical adaptations around pregnancy are just mental. Like your stroke volume increases, your blood pressure goes down in the first 2 trimesters and then up in the third. Your lung capacity is inhibited by the size. Basically, bump pushes everything up. So you just can't get a deep breath in. So when you're running, I think it always should be, or training for that matter, I think it always should be quality over quantity. So is the training supporting your body, or is it just pounding the roads for the sake of going out for a run when you could be doing exercises that would strengthen the glutes, strengthen the hamstrings and the lower body, improve the back and the posture, because that's all going to feed into your postpartum recovery, and just give you a chance to have the best labor and recovery that you can have.
And if you were dead set on jogging, you could probably go to the pool and do some aqua jogging if you were dead set on jogging. But you do think 12 weeks is when you would recommend women to stop running, so stop that impact kind of sport.
And like that, it depends. Like it's very individual. I don't want to give blanket guidelines, but it comes to a stage where you kind of have to say, is this going to be the best for my pelvic floor? Is this going to be the best for my body? And is there an alternative? So with my prenatal clients, what I do is we do sort of like 2 sets of strength exercises, and then we do an 8-minute AMRAP. And like there was one day that there was something wrong with Zoom, and I did the 8-minute AMRAP with my pregnant clients. And some of my pregnant clients are like 34, 36 weeks pregnant. I was sweating buckets afterwards, and I was like, okay, that's challenging for someone who's not pregnant and is fairly fit. And they're just like, oh yeah, sure, it's grand. You know what I mean? It's good to work up a sweat. So you can still work up a sweat, but be mindful of all the adaptations during pregnancy.
Amazing. So then obviously we'll talk about post-pregnancy then, because once you have a baby, like I don't have any kids myself, so this is just speculation and from talking to friends and stuff who have had kids, but you know, you are exhausted for the first while. Mm-hmm. So even you probably don't even have time to think about training for the first few weeks anyway.
Yeah, so like it's individual, and this all depends. It goes back to the labor and the delivery. So if you've had a really long labor, there was a long stage 2, or you had an emergency C-section, or even if you had a planned C-section, your recovery is all going to be individualized to your own circumstances, and even as well how much training you did before pregnancy, because when we're maintaining our fitness throughout our pregnancy, it means that we can labor a little bit easier and we can recover a little bit quicker. And that's not guaranteed, but that's just what I've seen with clients. And so for the first 6 weeks, you really want to keep the exercise down to a minimum, starting off with those reconnecting to the core and the pelvic floor with breathing exercises, some light mobility, some really light exercises, like a few squats, a few glute bridges, but that'd be it. Like no more than you would be doing day to day, as in like you're squatting to put the baby on the floor. So it makes sense that you would do a couple of sets of body weight squats, because you're just building that muscle that you need. And adding in walking, starting off at about 5 minutes, and that might be a walk down to the corner and back up, and it might feel very short. Building that up over the next couple of weeks to roughly about 30 minutes at the 6-week mark. And then you can kind of start, provided you're feeling good, some structured training. And that looks a little bit more like your traditional strength exercises, and slowly adding in that sort of cardiovascular conditioning. The recommendations for returning to run are between 3 and 6 months, and probably closer to 6 months, and having been checked by pelvic health physio. So they can give you a really good idea of what's going on in your pelvic floor, what corrective exercises you might need to do if you have a diastasis, that's the ab separation on the 6-pack muscle, or if you have a prolapse. But yeah, so sort of, adding in a little bit of stationary biking. And it's not just as simple as, going out and going for a jog. It really needs to follow a return to run similar to an injury. And I hate saying that because it's so negative, but it's the only way for people to understand. If you were a runner and you tore your ACL, you tore your hamstring, you wouldn't just sit on the couch for 6 weeks and then go out and go for a run. You would have a very strict rehab phase that you would do with different exercises. There would be load bearing, there would be impact, and then you would go out and you would run a couch to 5K style program. So jogging for 60 seconds, walk for 90. And that's the way that we should view returning to run. And I think if we did, we'd have a lot more women, participating in sports and in running clubs and back playing GAA and all of those things. Because the other way they do it is they rush into it, they get their 6-week GP clearance, they go out and go for a 2K run, and they end up with something like back pain, hip pain, knee pain, or something like incontinence. And then go, okay, well, this is my life now. I've had a baby. I just can't run again, or I can't train. And that's not right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But it does sound a lot like listening to your body, but doing that. And that was actually something that Greta last week talked about, just in terms of running. Prehab is so important. So doing that strength, that prehab work before you go for a run, or just doing it alongside the running, because in the long term that will prevent these injuries, and prevent injuries that are very preventable. Like, you don't want to be kicking yourself because, oh God, like for an extra half an hour there once a week, I could have prevented this injury, which is going to set me out for the next 3 months, maybe. So it sounds like it's very similar. Like you said, coming back from pregnancy, treat it like coming back from an injury.
Which, and I genuinely do hate using that phrase, because it is so negative. And you've had a baby and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. But we have to be realistic. There's a group of physios, Emma Brockwell, Grania Donnelly and Tom Groom, who've developed these return to run guidelines. And they're physios. And there's just this more holistic approach now around what you can and should do to get back running. And I think that's the key thing, is that we're not telling women that they can't run. We're telling them you can, but you need to do these few steps first. I don't know how many women are like, even balance wise, are, when they come to me in my postnatal classes, they can't stand on one foot. And I'm like, if you can't balance on one foot for 60 seconds, how the hell are you going to run a 5K when it's a single leg dynamic exercise without compensating somewhere through your pelvis, your knees, your back, or whatever it may be?
Yeah, that is a very good point. But again, it goes back to what we said, earlier about just being educated on it. Like, if women see other women just out running, they probably think, oh, I just want to be that. I just want to see how quick I can get back. But if they understand the consequences, essentially, of rushing into it, it can lead to let's say hardship in what should be a great time. Like, you've just had a baby, you're probably feeling really amazing when you're not tired and sleep deprived and all of that. So you really don't want to start off the first year with a negative thing such as back pain or knee pain or whatever it is.
And I think Sophie Power has done really well in documenting like her return to run after her third child. So for her second, she was clipped at that was it UTMB, where she was breastfeeding and pumping, and like I think her kid was maybe like 4 months old, and she was doing like this obviously ultra super tough race. And she's come on the recovery. Basically, she got pregnant with her third, and she changed up her training. So she said training for UTMB when she was pregnant with her second, she was doing pull-ups and stuff. And she said that like as she was doing the pull-ups, she looked down and she could see this massive doming through her midline, which is obviously the diastasis, and it's completely normal in pregnant people. But we shouldn't be pushing that intra-abdominal pressure out through that. And she just thought it was normal. She was just like, oh, cool. Look at my weird looking, that looks funny. But I'll keep going. And then for her third, she changed up her training. And there was actually more like, less of those sort of, really high intense, like max effort sort of pull-up sort of exercises. But there was more glute and hip focus. And she said that when she got back running after pregnancy with her third, she was actually a stronger runner. And she felt better in herself. And she started much slower. So I think her first couple of runs were maybe like, 10-second hill sprints. Like, there were easy jogs with 10-second hill sprints, which is much more sustainable than something like going out and running a UTMB when you're 4 months postpartum. It's like, the idea is, and I think most people agree, I want women, and I want to coach women who are going to be running in their 40s, their 50s, and their 60s, not just in that year postpartum. I want this to be sustainable for them, because when we think about menopause and all of those sort of changes, being active is going to be more beneficial to you than being active early postpartum.
Yeah, so you really should be looking at the long term rather than not setting goals for the first year. The first year should just be about getting back to running full stop, like not having a time or anything in your mind, just getting back to a level of running that is, as you said, sustainable.
Mm-hmm. And that you enjoy as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because then obviously, as you just mentioned there, like the far end of the spectrum is menopause. And again, it's something that every woman goes through. But again, it's something you hear it a bit more now on the radio and different things, but it's something that people just were quiet about. Like, people just never really spoke about menopause.
I think there's just been like this huge stigma over everything about like women's health, like this whole thing of like, you shouldn't really be affected by your menstrual cycle, you should just get up and get on with it. And postpartum, you know what I mean, you're not expected to have complications, you're just meant to enjoy the bubble of having a new baby and then just carry on as normal. But your body has been changed, and it's never going to go back, and that's another really negative thing. But you can build forward rather than hoping to bounce back. And the same when it comes to menopause. That huge drop off in estrogen has so many effects, and like, we're really only talking and learning about it now, that it's so important. Like, we know that like you said, menopause is going to happen to most women, or every woman, but there is ways to train and to enjoy life while when you're postmenopausal. I think the sort of the perimenopause is where you get all of the symptoms. So that's where your period is irregular, and that's where tracking is going to help you to recognize you're going through that change. You get the hot flushes and the fatigue and the brain fog and all that sort of stuff. Estrogen is really important because it's cardioprotective and it's bone protective. So without that estrogen, we're suddenly faced with higher incidence of heart attacks and heart disease, more osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. So that's why training has a really important function in menopause and older women. Adding strength training or impact exercises into your lifestyle can help to, that bone to form and to be stronger. It also gives you the upper body strength that if you fell on the ground to basically get up. It's shocking the amount of women who end up in nursing homes because they've had a fall. Suddenly their independent living's gone out the window, or they've broken a hip and they need to get in to be minded. But strength training can improve your balance, improve your bone density, strengthen ligaments and muscles, which is it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer for the likes of me and you, but trying to get older people to understand that actually you need to do a bit of work to maintain what you have is really important. And then when we think about the cardio benefits of estrogen, because we've lost that, we really need to be doing something that gets us out of breath. Older women, like my mum is terrible. She'll go for a walk and that's it. And like, I don't think she's been out of breath since she had kids. And no doubt her lung function, her heart health is all suffering because of that. So we just need to encourage women across the lifespan to stay active. Even if that is something like yoga or swimming, fine, but adding in some impact or loading exercises into that will just help to keep the bones and the ligaments and that healthier.
Yeah, you should be looking at, as you said, maintaining what you have and not losing that, because obviously it must be a lot easier if you build these habits before you hit menopause and keep it going throughout, rather than suddenly this starts happening to you, your body is going through these changes, and then you're like, okay, I need to get myself into gear. What can I do? It's probably better to start in advance and have these habits built. But then at the same time, for women who are maybe listening to this, who are going through it, it's never too late to start either.
No. And I would completely agree with you there. It's the same if you take into account pregnancy. The earlier you start in pregnancy, the easier it is to get back into the postpartum. So the earlier you start strength training, the easier it is to maintain that through your lifestyle or your life cycle. And it's even just general things like years ago, the female population would have been healthier because women were active on farms and in industry. So they were carrying, loads like buckets of water or buckets of feed, churning butter. Like that's an arm workout in itself. Like your core, it is on fire after that.
Yeah.
So it's these things that we've kind of moved away from as we've become more industrialized and a little bit sort of more comfortable. But it's having that little bit of, and I think it's great. Some community centres do like, the golden oldies sort of training sessions. But a lot of that is chair based. And like the best client I ever had was like a 90-year-old woman. She had a pacemaker and she basically just wanted to get really strong. Her golden oldies class finished over the summer and she got in touch with me for personal training. And I was like, yeah, sure. We'll call over and we'll see how you get on. And she loved it. Like she was doing like weights, she was doing kettlebell swings, she was doing ball slams, she was doing farmers carries, and she actually really enjoyed the training. And it was like, why can't we have all of our older women doing that? Because they'll be so much happier and so much healthier. We think about like, the typical things that you think about when you think of older people is that sort of sarcopenia or that osteo, so loss of muscle mass and loss of bone density. But there's diabetes is a really real sort of effect of older people. And even training will help to improve your insulin sensitivity. So you're warding off that diabetes as well. So it just means you're living healthier for longer. We're all going to live longer anyway nowadays. So if we were healthier, we'd be better off,
Yeah, absolutely. And you do see a lot more gyms advertising that kind of, golden oldies or that kind of later years training. And it is fantastic to see because obviously, we're specifically talking about the benefits for women, but there are benefits for older men as well for getting into the gym, staying active. It is just great to keep going, keep your body moving, keep that strength. Like you said, even if you just have a fall, being able to pull yourself back up.
Exactly. And like men go through a sort of a menopause as well, where the drop off in testosterone affects their muscle mass, their bone density. I think people get old because they stop moving, not stop moving because they get old, if that makes sense. And we need to really swing that emphasis that people are just physically active, into their later years. And like you said, it's never too late to start. So if there's anyone listening who is unsure of what to do, like the best thing to do is like, the basic strength exercises. So like the stuff that we've all kind of been taught, from physios or like, gym classes is your squats, your lunges. Like they're going to build that muscle mass in the legs. And then like some upper body stuff like push-ups, rows. Like it doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be this super long routine. Even if you were just doing 10 minutes a day, it all adds up. And that goes for the postpartum as well. You were saying earlier about like feeling tired and feeling fatigued, like try and do 10 minutes. And if you can do 10 minutes, if baby's still sleeping and you can get 15, great. But if not, just call it a day, 10 minutes. It's better than doing nothing. And I think that's the real important thing, is just to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, a little is better than nothing. As they say, you might be the slowest in a race, but you're still faster than everyone on the couch. Exactly. So it is really just about getting out there, getting involved, and, the benefits of it, they're immeasurable. Like there's just so many different benefits at all stages. But thank you so much for coming on for the chat. Is there anything else you want to add? Any other piece of information you think would be important just to keep this conversation going, or just to educate us in general?
So I have a blog post on my website about the menstrual cycle training and nutrition. So just like, you know, have a read through that. If you have any questions, like, feel free to reach out and email me and ask. So in the show notes, I'll also share some resources of some physios who are really working on menopause now, and just making the information around that and helping people to move a little bit more throughout those. And if my Instagram is there for you know, adaptations and considerations for pregnancy training. And again, if you've any questions, like, feel free to reach out and ask. I have no problem supporting women in sport.
Amazing. And just your Instagram, we will link it on our Instagram, our social media, but it's Fit Mná. For anyone listening who is not Irish, Mná is just the Irish for woman. So Fit Woman, MNA, but we will link that all. So thank you so much, Martina, for coming on. And it has been my absolute pleasure. I don't know about people listening, but I have certainly got a lot from it. And, you know, stuff that I will definitely use if, you know, please God, in the future, have a successful pregnancy, and then obviously later years with menopause. I do think the information here has been invaluable. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rachel. It was an absolute pleasure.
Great. Talk to you soon.